My ex-husband just proposed to my ex-best friend. I found out through Instagram. But what happened next will shock you. I wasn't going to let them have their fairy tale without the truth coming out first. So there I was scrolling through Instagram when this perfect engagement photo pops up. Mark down on one knee with some massive diamond ring and Sarah crying happy tears. The caption read, "She said yes. Can't wait to spend forever with my best friend and soulmate." 300 likes already. I screenshot that post so fast my phone almost slipped. This had to be some kind of sick joke. I immediately called Sarah and she actually picked up. "Jessica, hi," she said in that fake sweet voice she uses when she knows she's done something wrong. "Are you kidding me right now, Sarah? An engagement post? That's how I find out?" "Jessica, I wanted to tell you in person, but you've been so hostile lately and Mark thought maybe it would be better if we just..." "Hostile? I've been honest about how messed up this whole situation is. You were supposed to be my best friend, Sarah. We talked about everything together for 12 years, and now you're marrying my ex-husband like that's totally normal." She got quiet, then said, "Jess, you guys have been divorced for 8 months. And honestly, after everything you told me about your marriage, I thought you'd be happy that he found someone who appreciates him." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Appreciates him. Sarah, I made him into the man he is today. When I met Mark, he was wearing cargo shorts to restaurants and didn't even know how to use a credit card properly. I taught him how to dress and manage money and be a real adult. That's not really how he tells it, Jessica. Of course that's not how he tells it. He's rewriting history to make himself look like the victim, just like he did during our entire divorce. I hung up on her right there. 8 months after our relationship ended and she's already engaged to him. They had to have been planning this behind my back for way longer than they were admitting. I called Mark next, even though it was almost midnight. He answered, sounding half asleep. "What do you want, Jessica?" "Don't play dumb with me, Mark. I saw the post. When exactly were you planning to tell me you were getting engaged?" "We don't owe you any explanations about our relationship, Jessica. We're not married anymore, remember? You made that very clear." His voice was so cold and distant. This was not the Mark one married. "I made that clear? You're the one who walked out Mark. You're the one who gave up on our marriage instead of working through our problems like adults." "Our problems?" "Jessica, you criticized everything I did for 3 years. You told me I wasn't ambitious enough, then got mad when I worked late. Nothing I did was ever good enough for you. I was trying to help you become the best version of yourself. That's what marriage is about, Mark. Supporting each other and growing together. No, Jessica, marriage is about love and respect and partnership. Things you never understood." Then he hung up on me too. I sat there feeling completely betrayed by the two people who were supposed to care about me most. But I wasn't going to let them just rewrite history and play happy couple. "My name's Jessica, I'm 33 years old, and I work in marketing for a tech startup downtown. When I met Mark 3 years ago at my friend Emma's housewarming party, he definitely wasn't my usual type. I typically dated guys in finance or law who wore nice suits and drove luxury cars. Mark was an accountant wearing a wrinkled button-down and driving a Honda Civic. But Emma kept pushing us together, and Mark was really sweet and attentive. He brought me coffee every morning and remembered little things I mentioned. My mom kept asking when I was going to find a nice, stable guy, so I figured maybe I should give him a chance. Sarah was actually the one who convinced me to say yes when Mark proposed after dating for 8 months. She said, "Jess, he adores you and he's reliable and kind. Maybe it's time to appreciate what you have." So when Mark proposed, I said yes, even though the ring was smaller than I'd hoped for. The wedding planning was honestly where our first real problem started. Mark had these ideas about keeping things simple, but I'd been dreaming about my wedding since I was little, and I wasn't going to settle for some backyard barbecue situation. Sarah was my maid of honor, and she was so helpful with everything. She listened to me vent when Mark was being difficult about the budget. He kept saying things like, "Jessica, do we really need up lighting?" And I had to keep explaining that this was our one wedding. A real husband would want his wife to have the wedding of her dreams. I told him when he complained about the cost of the band I wanted. The early months of marriage were actually pretty good. Mark was still trying really hard to make me happy, and I was trying to help him improve himself. I organized his closet and threw out those terrible cargo shorts and bought him nice dress shirts. "You're so lucky to have someone who cares enough to help you become your best self," I told him when he complained about me reorganizing his home office. But Mark started getting resistant to my suggestions after a few months. When I mentioned maybe he should ask for a promotion at work, he said, "I like my job the way it is, Jessica." It was like he stopped trying completely. He'd come home from work and just want to watch TV instead of working on the personal development goals we'd discussed. The money fights were the worst part. Mark made decent money as an accountant, but it wasn't enough to support the lifestyle I was used to. I was making more than him in marketing, and I felt like I was constantly subsidizing his financial shortcomings. "If you made as much as David makes, we wouldn't need to have these conversations," I told him during one particularly bad fight. That's when Mark started doing this thing where he'd get really quiet during arguments, instead of trying to work through problems with me. Sarah started noticing the tension when we'd all hang out together. Mark would barely talk during dinner parties, and when he did talk, it was usually to disagree with something I'd said. I was so embarrassed that he contradicted me in front of our friends. Later, I told him a real husband would support his wife in public even if he disagrees in private, but he just said a real wife wouldn't make vacation plans without involving her husband. Things got worse when Mark started setting these ridiculous boundaries about spending time with his friends. He wanted guys' nights twice a week, which seemed excessive when we were newlyweds. The breaking point came when Mark announced he was going on a weekend fishing trip without discussing it with me first. We had plans to look at houses that Saturday, and he just decided his friends were more important. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Mark. You make unilateral decisions and then act like I'm unreasonable for having a problem with them. "It's one weekend, Jessica. We can look at houses the following Saturday." It's not about the weekend, Mark. It's about the fact that you don't prioritize our marriage. A real husband would check with his wife before making plans. A real wife would trust her husband to maintain friendships without permission. That word permission made me so angry because that's not what this was about. This was about mutual respect and consideration. After that fishing trip, Mark seemed different, more distant. We barely spoke for 3 days, and then he sat me down and said he wanted to talk. "I think we need to consider counseling, Jessica. We're not happy and something needs to change." The counseling sessions were honestly worse than I expected. The therapist, Dr. Martinez, kept asking us to talk about our feelings instead of focusing on the actual problems. When I tried to explain how Mark had stopped putting effort into our relationship, she'd redirect with questions like, "How did that make you feel, Jessica?" instead of addressing his behavior. Dr. Martinez had us do these ridiculous exercises like active listening, where we had to repeat back what the other person said. When Mark would say something like, "I feel like I can't do anything right," I'd repeat it back but then add, "But that's because you're not trying hard enough." And Dr. Martinez would interrupt saying, "Jessica, that's not what active listening means." She also gave us homework assignments that were completely pointless. One week we had to write down 3 things we appreciated about each other every day. I wrote genuine things like, "Mark made coffee this morning," and "Mark picked up his clothes." But Mark's responses were so generic, like, "Jessica is intelligent," and "Jessica works hard." It was like he wasn't even trying to engage with the process. The most frustrating part was how Dr. Martinez seemed to take Mark's side constantly. When I'd bring up specific examples of how Mark had let me down, she'd say, "Let's focus on how that made you feel, rather than blame." But when Mark complained about me, she'd nod along like his feelings were so valid. During one session, I pointed this out. "Dr. Martinez, I notice you seem more interested in Mark's perspective than mine," I said. "When I talk about real issues in our marriage, you shut me down, but when he complains about feeling criticized, you act like that's the most important thing." "Jessica, I hear that you're feeling unheard," she replied. "Can you tell Mark directly how that makes you feel?" See what I mean? Instead of acknowledging that she was being biased, she turned it into another feelings exercise. Meanwhile, Mark was sitting there looking all thoughtful and introspective, like he was really working on himself, when actually he was just playing the victim. Mark started changing during those sessions in ways that honestly worried me. He became more articulate about his complaints, and started using therapy language to make me sound unreasonable. In our fourth session, he said, "I feel like our communication pattern is that Jessica expresses dissatisfaction and I try to fix whatever she's unhappy about, but then there's always something new." "That's interesting, Mark," Dr. Martinez said. "How long have you felt like you've been in that pattern?" "Probably since we got married, maybe even before that during wedding planning." I couldn't believe he was rewriting our entire relationship history. "Mark, that's not a pattern that's called having standards and expectations in a marriage. I was trying to help you become a better person." "But Jessica," Dr. Martinez interrupted, "I'm hearing that when Mark tries to meet your expectations, you find new things for him to work on. How do you think that might feel for him?" This was exactly the problem. Dr. Martinez was making it sound like wanting your husband to improve was some kind of character flaw instead of normal wife behavior. Of course, I had expectations. That's what marriage is about. Two people pushing each other to be their best selves. The breaking point came during our fifth session when Dr. Martinez suggested we try an exercise where Mark could express his feelings without me responding until he was completely finished. Mark talked for like 10 minutes about feeling walking on eggshells and never knowing what would set me off, and how he felt like nothing I did was ever good enough. When it was finally my turn to respond, I said, "Mark, I think you're being overly sensitive and taking everything personally. When I suggest improvements, it's because I care about you and want us to have a good marriage. Most wives would just give up and let their husbands stay mediocre." Dr. Martinez looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Jessica, I'm curious about something. When you say, 'most wives would give up,' what do you think that says about how you view your role in the marriage?" "I view my role as being a supportive partner who helps Mark reach his potential, instead of just accepting whatever level of effort he feels like putting in." "And how do you think Mark experiences that support?" I looked at Mark, who was staring at his hands and looking all defeated. "I think Mark experiences it as criticism because he's not used to someone caring enough to help him grow." "Mark, is that accurate?" Dr. Martinez asked. Mark looked up and for the first time in weeks made direct eye contact with me. "No, Jessica. I experience it as constant judgment, like I'm this project you're working on instead of a person you love." The way he said it was so cold and final. This wasn't the Mark I married, who used to appreciate my guidance and input. This was someone who'd been influenced by a therapist to think that having expectations in marriage was somehow wrong. After that session, I could tell Mark was different. He started using therapy speak at home like, "I don't feel heard," and "that feels like criticism to me," whenever I tried to have normal conversations about our relationship. It was like Dr. Martinez had given him a whole new vocabulary to shut down any discussion about how he could be a better husband. The homework assignments got worse too. Dr. Martinez wanted us to practice nonviolent communication, which meant we had to phrase everything in terms of our own feelings instead of addressing actual problems. So instead of saying, "Mark, you need to help more with housework," I was supposed to say, "I feel overwhelmed when I'm doing most of the housework." It was ridiculous because it took the focus off his behavior and made everything about my emotional reaction. Mark was so much better at this fake communication style than I was. He'd say things like, "I feel disconnected when we don't spend quality time together," instead of just admitting he wasn't making enough effort to plan dates or special activities. Dr. Martinez would praise him for expressing his needs so clearly, while I struggled to translate normal relationship feedback into feelings language. By our sixth session, I realized that counseling was actually making our marriage worse instead of better. Mark was becoming more confident in his complaints about me, and Dr. Martinez was basically teaching him that all my efforts to improve our relationship were actually toxic behavior. When I brought this up, Dr. Martinez said, "Jessica, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated with the process. What do you think might be driving that frustration?" Everything was always turned back into my feelings instead of addressing the real issues. Mark wasn't putting enough effort into our marriage, and instead of fixing that, we were spending hundreds of dollars for someone to validate his resistance to growth and change. After 6 weeks of counseling sessions that were going nowhere, Mark dropped the bomb. "I want a separation," he announced. I need some space to figure out what I want. I was completely blindsided. A separation? Mark, we're in counseling to fix our problems, not to give up. I'm not giving up, Jessica. I'm recognizing that we need time apart. Mark moved out the following weekend, and suddenly, I was separated at 32 years old. Sarah was incredible during this time. She brought me food and listened to me cry and reminded me that Mark's decision to leave said more about him than me. You're an amazing woman, Jessica, she told me. If Mark can't see that, then he doesn't deserve you. The separation lasted 4 months, and during that time, Mark seemed to be thriving. He joined a gym and started hiking and posting photos, looking happy and relaxed. Meanwhile, I was struggling with sadness and loneliness. The papers arrived on a Tuesday in March. I called him immediately. Why didn't you tell me you were doing this, Mark? I thought separation meant we were taking time to work on things. Jessica, I told you I needed space to figure out what I wanted. I figured it out. Just like that. 2.5 years of marriage and you figured out you don't want to try anymore. His voice was so final and detached. This wasn't the Mark I'd married who used to bring me coffee and tell me I was beautiful. Sarah was my lifeline during the legal process. She helped me find a lawyer and listened to me vent about how unfair everything was. But I could tell something was different about Sarah in the weeks after our relationship ended. She seemed distracted and started canceling our regular girls' nights. When I asked if everything was okay, she said she was just busy with work. Then about 6 weeks after my divorce was final, I saw them together at Starbucks downtown. Mark and Sarah sitting at a corner table and Sarah laughing at something Mark was saying. They looked comfortable together, like they'd done this before. I felt sick watching them through the window. I called Sarah that night. I saw you with Mark today at Starbucks. What was that about? Sarah got really quiet, then said, Jessica, we need to talk. Can I come over? She came to my apartment looking nervous and guilty. Jess, I need to tell you something, and I know you're going to be upset, but I hope you can understand. Just say it, Sarah. Mark and I have been talking since your separation, and we've gotten close, and we're seeing each other now. The room started spinning. My best friend and my ex-husband were dating. How long has this been going on? About a month. But Jess, nothing happened while you were married. I would never do that to you. A month. Sarah, our relationship only ended 6 weeks ago. You've been dating my former husband for a month, and you didn't think to mention it. Sarah started crying. Jessica, I care about you so much, but I also care about Mark, and we have real feelings for each other. Real feelings? Sarah, you listened to me complain about Mark for months. You know everything that was wrong with our marriage. How can you have real feelings for someone you know treated me badly? That's just it, Jess. After talking to Mark, I realized there might have been 2 sides to what happened. Mark is kind and thoughtful and funny, and maybe you guys just weren't compatible. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sarah was rewriting the entire history of my marriage to justify her betrayal. Sarah left that night, and I felt more alone than I'd ever felt. Over the next few weeks, I found out through mutual friends that Mark and Sarah's relationship was getting serious fast. They were posting photos together and going to events as a couple. Emma told me at coffee that Mark seemed happier than she'd seen him in a long time, which was like a knife in my chest. Maybe they're just better suited for each other, Emma suggested. Sometimes people are perfect individually, but not perfect together. But that wasn't what this was about. Sarah knew exactly what kind of person Mark was, because I'd told her everything. 3 months into their relationship, Mark and Sarah moved in together. Our mutual friends started inviting them to events as a couple, which meant I was either excluded or forced to watch them be happy together. The engagement post was the final betrayal after 6 months of watching them build the relationship I'd wanted with Mark. They'd gotten engaged on the anniversary of the day they started dating. Mark had dated me for 8 months before proposing, but apparently with Sarah, he knew after 10 months. So when I saw that engagement post, I decided I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. I started by commenting, "Congratulations, Sarah. I hope you're prepared for Mark's complete inability to handle feedback when the honeymoon phase ends." Within an hour, my comment had been deleted and Sarah had blocked me on Instagram. I called Emma and told her exactly what I thought about their fairy tale romance. "Emma, you know what Mark was like when we were married. He was stubborn and lazy and gave up the second our relationship required any real effort, but Emma seemed uncomfortable. Jessica, I think Mark and Sarah are really happy together. Maybe it's time to focus on moving forward with your own life. Everyone was taking Mark and Sarah's side like they were the victims instead of me. 2 weeks after the engagement, I found out they were planning a small wedding in October, less than a year after they started dating. I decided I needed to do something dramatic, so I wrote a long Facebook post explaining the timeline. For those wondering about Mark and Sarah's beautiful love story, here are some facts. Sarah was my maid of honor and spent 2 years listening to me work through my marriage problems with Mark. 2 months after my divorce was final, they started dating. 6 months later, they're engaged. The post got attention, but not the kind I was hoping for. People seemed uncomfortable with me airing this publicly. By the end of the day, I'd gotten private messages from friends asking me to remove it. The next weekend, there was a birthday party for our mutual friend Chris, and I knew Mark and Sarah would be there. I decided this was my opportunity to confront them face to face. They walked in, holding hands, and everyone greeted them like they were this adorable couple. I waited until they were talking to a group, then walked over. Hey Sarah, hey Mark, congratulations on the engagement. Sarah looked panicked and Mark's face went blank. It's so amazing how quickly you guys figured out you were meant to be together. What was it, 8 months from start to engagement? Everyone looked uncomfortable, and Chris tried to change the subject, but I wasn't done. I mean, Mark, it took you 8 months just to propose to me when we were dating, but I guess when you know, right? Jessica, can we not do this here? Mark said in that calm voice. Do what, Mark? I'm just making conversation. Sarah, when exactly did you realize you had feelings for Mark? Was it while you were listening to me cry about our marriage problems? Jessica, stop, Mark said firmly. That's when Emma appeared and grabbed my arm. Jess, come with me, now. She pulled me toward the bathroom while everyone stared. In the bathroom, Emma turned on me. What is wrong with you, Jessica? You just humiliated them in front of everyone. I humiliated them. They humiliated me by starting a relationship behind my back. Your relationship ended 8 months ago, Jessica. They waited a respectful amount of time. You're the one making this ugly. When I came out, Mark and Sarah were gone, and several people were looking at me like I was crazy. Chris came over and said, Hey, Jess, maybe you should think about heading home. Over the next few weeks, word got around, and suddenly I was getting fewer invitations to events. When I asked Emma about it, she said, People are uncomfortable, Jessica. Your behavior lately has been concerning. Concerning? I was the victim here, and everyone was treating me like I was the problem. 2 months before their wedding, Sarah asked Emma to be her maid of honor. My replacement maid of honor for my replacement in Mark's life. The wedding happened on a Saturday in October, and I spent the day looking at photos people posted on social media. Sarah looked beautiful, and Mark looked happier than I'd ever seen him. Emma posted a photo with Sarah and wrote, So honored to stand beside my beautiful friend. All our mutual friends were celebrating this betrayal like it was some fairy tale. That night, I wrote one final Facebook post. Today, my former husband married my former maid of honor 8 months after our relationship ended. For everyone celebrating this beautiful love story, I hope you never experience the pain of being replaced so quickly by someone you trusted. Within an hour, the post was reported and removed. Sarah's sister sent me a private message saying, Jessica, please stop. You're trying to ruin Sarah's wedding day with your bitterness. 3 months later, they announced they were pregnant. A baby announcement with Mark's hand on Sarah's bump. 6 months of marriage, and they were already building the life I'd wanted. I deactivated my Facebook account that day because I couldn't handle seeing any more updates about their perfect life. I'd lost my husband, my best friend, and most of my social circle, all because 2 people decided their happiness was more important than the destruction they left behind. Now I'm 33 years old, starting over completely, while Mark and Sarah are living in marital bliss with a baby on the way. I still don't understand how I became the villain when I was just trying to have a good marriage and Sarah was supposed to be my friend. Subscribe if you think some people never learn from their mistakes. Hit like if you've ever known someone who plays victim in every situation. Have you ever had a friend who turned out to be completely toxic in relationships? Share your story in the comments.